Hello everyone, I'm Arzu and I welcome you on our YouTube channel Somas Evolution Classes. I will be discussing various aspects of radiation protection in this video. Basically, radiation is the emission of energy in the form of waves or particles. It comes from unstable atoms that undergo radioactive decay or is produced by machines. So radiation protection is a very important aspect for the people working in radiation, as unhealthy amounts of radiation exposure to our body can cause severe health effects. Radiation protection is the protection of people from harmful ionizing radiation. We have two types of radiation sources that account for the exposure we get, and they are natural sources and man-made sources. Natural radiation comes from outer space and from Earth. Man-made radiation sources include medical imaging and nuclear power plants. We categorize radiation into two types, ionizing and non-ionizing. Ionizing radiation carries more energy, which is enough to ionize atoms and molecules and break their chemical bonds. Ionizing radiation consists of alpha, beta particles and gamma rays. This type of radiation is capable of causing harmful effects in the biological medium through which it travels. Whereas non-ionizing radiation has low energy and they are not capable of producing any changes in the living tissues. They usually emit heat, which can sometimes be so intense as to result in burns. Microwaves, visible lights and infrared radiation are examples of non-ionizing radiation. We are using ionizing radiation in medicine and industry, which needs to be used while keeping in mind the health hazards it can cause to humans. X-ray, computed tomography, bone densitometers and nuclear medicine use ionizing radiation for diagnosis and treatment. X-ray uses X-ray tube that includes anode and cathode to produce X-ray that are used to create 2D images of skeletal structures to identify abnormalities. Computed tomography works by fusing cross-sectional X-ray images to produce a 3D image. It is used to visualize internal organs, bones, soft tissues, and blood vessels. DEXA scan uses low-energy X-ray beam to determine bone density and bone mass loss. Nuclear medicine works by injecting radioactive substances into our bloodstream to diagnose and treat various diseases. Regulatory bodies develop and maintain the system of radiation use and standards for radiation protection. Their main objective is to ensure safe usage of radiation among the society. In India, the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board oversees the use of radiation and its protection. The mission of AERB is to ensure the use of ionizing radiation and nuclear energy in India does not cause any undue risk to health of people and the environment. There are 5 factors on which the radiation protection depends, and accordingly we use different principles for the same. First is the exposure situations. Radiation exposure is a measure of ionization of air due to presence of ionizing radiation in the environment. We have 3 types of exposures. First is planned exposure. This type of exposure basically includes the exposure that is planned in advance, and accordingly radiation protection is planned. The amount of radiation exposure can lead to the estimate of extent of exposure. Second exposure includes the accidental or unplanned exposure. This type of situation may require urgent intervention of protective actions to control the radiation levels. Last is the existing exposure. It includes type of radiation exposure that is already existing and needs to be managed by selecting appropriate methods to control the exposure. We have 3 principles of radiation protection that are applied in medical imaging. First is justification. It recommends to terminate the use of radiation that is not necessary, and each and every radiation exposure must be justified. Every procedure that uses ionizing radiation should have more advantages than the disadvantages. The principle of optimization recommends that the radiation dose should be low enough to produce a good quality medical image, along with keeping in mind the protection of workers and the public. Limitations suggest some standards for both workers and the public that should not be exceeded for radiation exposure doses. Next factor is regulation of external dose. We can control the dose of radiation workers and public by using cardinal principle, which works on three factors. First is time. If we reduce the time of an exposure, it will directly reduce the amount of radiation dose. Next is distance. If we increase the distance between the source of radiation and the subject, it will result in a low radiation dose. Shielding suggests that radiation dose can be lowered or ceased by using a material which can absorb the energy of radiation. Shielding material is used for reducing the radiation amount to a level that is safe for humans. Next is regulation of internal dose. Internal dose is the amount of radiation exposure that we get from radioactive substances that enter our body through inhalation or ingestion. There are four pathways by which radioactive material can enter our body. The first is through inhalation of radioactive particles or radon gas. Next is ingestion of radioactive substances through our food or in liquids. Some radioactive materials such as tritium oxide can be absorbed in our body through skin. In nuclear medicine, radioisotopes such as technetium is injected in our bloodstream that can account to the internal radiation exposure. Most important protection principle is ALARA. ALARA stands for as low as reasonably achievable. It is the gold standard principle for radiation protection, and it suggests that we have to do everything that is reasonably achievable to reduce the radiation exposure. The principle is based on the idea that any radiation exposure can increase the chances of health effects occurring in the human body. To successfully implement ALARA principle in the radiation safety program, it is important that every reasonable effort is made to maintain the radiation exposure as far below the dose limits for both workers and the public. That was all the brief information about the radiation protection. Please do like and subscribe to our channel SOMAS Evolution Classes for more interesting videos. Thank you.